Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sound Mind podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wanted to know about music. So, whether you're a music lover or are just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place. Now, it's been a heavy week, a super difficult time in the world right now, and with everything going on, I felt like this week was the best fit to talk about how music can help us in times of uncertainty, about finding calm in the noise and why we crave certain songs during times of crisis. Not just personal suffering, but more on a wider level, I guess, of unrest, uncertainty, and struggle. We're lucky enough to have many things in this world. We've got access to information, access to technology, access to each other. But I think one of the privileges that we often overlook is that we have access to music almost constantly, indefinitely. At any moment of the day, we can press play and alter the emotional atmosphere around us. And if you're listening to this podcast right now, I'm going to assume something about you. You're likely lucky enough to have a device, internet access, headphones or speakers, and the freedom to what you want to listen to. And that might feel normal, almost mundane, actually, but historically, that level of autonomy is actually extraordinary. You get to decide what fills your mental and emotional space. In times of uncertainty, like political instability, economic stress, social division, and collective grief, we don't just enjoy music, we almost instinctively turn to it. And you might have noticed this in yourself recently or just during times of struggle and stress. Rewatching old comfort shows instead of starting something new, replaying the album that you loved when you were 16, returning to childhood songs that feel just strangely grounding, looping the same track even for days because nothing else quite feels right. And maybe you've caught yourself wondering, why this? Why now? Why am I reaching backwards? But honestly, I'm so guilty of this. I do this all the time. And honestly, it's not random at all. It's not regression, it's regulation, actually. When we can't control the macro, we reach for micro control. We look for areas where our choices still matter and where our influence is tangible. And I think that music is one of the most immediate forms of that control. You definitely can't stabilize the news, but you can choose the next song that you're going to listen to. You can't slow down political tension, but you can slow down your breathing with a piece of music that really just calms your nervous system. And during periods of stress, the body shifts into this sense of heightened alertness. We've got increased cortisol, elevated heart rate, and shallow breathing. Your nervous system is preparing for threat. But unlike acute danger, collective stress actually tends to be chronic. It really just exists in the background of our lives. And music offers predictability in the face of that unpredictability. Rhythm provides this temporal structure. Harmony provides tension and resolution. And repetition provides familiarity. And at the end of the day, our brains are pattern-seeking machines. When the external world feels chaotic, predictable sound can feel so stabilizing. Now, there is research showing that familiar music activates autobiographical memory networks, particularly in areas that are associated with identity and self-continuity. So that means that when everything feels unstable, familiar music reminds you who you are. It reinforces this narrative of self that stretches over time and says that you felt uncertainty before, you survived, and you're still you. And that's why we come back to this craving for, I guess, feeling anchored in that. So today I want to explore this idea more deeply. Not just whether music can unite us, although that's a huge part of it as well, but how music functions psychologically when the world feels so loud. Is it escape? Is it resistance? Regulation? Identity preservation? So let's unpack all of that. Now, I just want to start off by saying that if the emotional backdrop of this moment feels different, it's because it is. It's not necessarily worse than other eras in history, but faster, louder, and more relentless, for sure. We're living in this attention economy that just runs on urgency. We've got news alerts constantly vibrating in our pockets, headlines competing for outrage, and our social feeds just algorithmically prioritizing what provokes, shocks, or unsettles because heightened emotion keeps us engaged and engagement keeps us scrolling. And the result is something that psychologists often refer to as news fatigue, a state of this cognitive and emotional exhaustion caused by prolonged exposure to negative or high arousal information. Unlike a single stressful event, this kind of stress is ambient. It accumulates quietly, kind of in the background. You may not feel panicked, but you feel tense. Not quite devastated, but like slightly on edge and never really settled. And layer onto that emotional overstimulation. So the average person today consumes more information in a single day than previous generations might have encountered in weeks, which is pretty insane. Our nervous system doesn't always distinguish between information and threat. We move rapidly between political commentary, personal updates, forecasts, global crises, and entertainment, often within the same 5-minute scroll. High arousal content, whether it's anger, fear, or moral outrage, activates physiological responses. So our heart rate shifts, our muscles tighten, and cortisol rises. And yet, while we're consuming more information than any generation in history, we're arguably regulating less. Scrolling is not regulation. It feels active, but it's largely passive. We absorb these emotional cues without actually process them. We move from stimulus to stimulus without closure. And algorithms just amplify this by feeding us content aligned with our previous reactions, creating what could be described as algorithmic stress, a feedback loop in which the emotional tone of what we consume becomes increasingly intense because intensity drives engagement. And here's where this contrast becomes important because passive consumption is reactive. It allows these external systems to shape our internal state. But intentional listening, on the other hand, is proactive. It's a deliberate shaping of emotional input. So scrolling is like, show me what's happening. But something called soundscaping would be choosing what fills your mental space. So music listening can also be either passive or intentional. Background noise while you're multitasking is not the same as consciously choosing a song to shift your mood. One diffuses attention and the other one is directing it. So what if, instead of defaulting to doom scrolling when we feel uneasy, we designed our emotional soundscape with the same intentionality that platforms are designing our feeds? What if we treated our auditory environment as something we curate, rather than something that simply happens to us? Now, soundscaping is not about denial. It's not about ignoring reality or retreating into this fantasy land. It's about recognizing that your nervous system has limits and acknowledging that constant activation is not sustainable for any of us. And it's all about reclaiming the small but meaningful domains of agency that we hold. It's all about deciding how much of it your nervous system can actually hold and intentionally creating these moments of stability within that landscape. So if we move beyond intuition and look at the psychology and neuroscience, the question becomes, what is music actually doing to us when we feel stressed? Why does pressing play feel regulating in a way that scrolling doesn't? Well, there's a few key mechanisms at work. Let's start with the body. Stress is not just a thought, it's physiological. When we perceive uncertainty or threat, whether that's a breaking news alert or a destabilizing headline, the autonomic nervous system literally shifts. So your heart rate increases, your sympathetic branch activates, and that means that your breathing also becomes shallower, cortisol rises, and your muscles tense up. Your body is preparing. And the issue is that in modern life, the threats are often informational rather than physical, but the body still responds. Now, music has been shown to directly influence this stress response. Multiple studies have found that listening to calming music can reduce cortisol levels. So, for example, one study found that participants who were exposed to relaxing music after a stressor showed significantly faster cortisol recovery compared to just silence. And in medical settings, music interventions have been associated with lower heart rate, reduced blood pressure, and improved parasympathetic activation, which is the branch of the nervous system associated with rest and recovery. But how does it do this? So, one mechanism that I've spoken about quite a lot on the Sound Mind is entrainment. Entrainment refers to the tendency of biological rhythms to synchronize with external rhythms. So, in other words, your heart rate and breathing can subtly align with the tempo of the music that you're listening to. So, slower tempos encourage slower breathing. And when life feels predictable, rhythmic predictability becomes stabilizing. Music also provides temporal structure. Stress often feels chaotic and formless, but a song has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Tension and resolution, anticipation and release, and that structure alone can be regulating for our nervous system. And another mechanism at play here is emotional contagion, which is the idea that we internally mirror the emotional qualities that we perceive in sound. So if a piece of music expresses calm, the listener may begin to feel calm. If it expresses sadness, then we might feel sad, but in a safe way. And this isn't just metaphorical. Neuroimaging research literally shows overlapping brain regions involved in both perceiving and experiencing emotion during music listening, which is pretty amazing. But I think there's also something powerful about co-regulation through sound. Humans regulate each other through rhythm long before language. Think of lullabies, rocking, chanting, even like communal singing. And when we listen to music created by others, especially familiar or meaningful artists, there can be this subtle sense of shared emotional space. You're not alone in that feeling. Someone else expressed it first. Music doesn't just distract you from stress, it actively interacts with your nervous system. But now let's move from the body to the self. Now, I mentioned it in the beginning, but one of the most fascinating patterns that happens during uncertain times is the return to nostalgia. People replay teenage albums, they revisit songs from childhood, gravitate towards music that shaped their formative years. And psychologically, this links to something known as the reminiscence bump, which is a well-documented phenomenon where adults tend to recall a lot more memories from adolescence and early adulthood. Music from that period often carries especially strong emotional and identity associations. I also mentioned previously that research has shown that familiar music activates areas linked to self-referential processing and autobiographical memory, meaning that when you listen to music that mattered to you, for example, when you were 16, you're literally reactivating a version of yourself. And during times of instability, identity continuity becomes so psychologically important. When external systems feel uncertain, we look for internal stability. Who am I? What do I stand for? And what's remained consistent in my life? These are all questions that we ask ourselves. And music becomes this kind of autobiographical glue. It connects past and present, reminds us of who we were, what we valued, who we loved, and what we survived. It reinforces this narrative of self that stretches over time. I just think nostalgia is such a beautiful thing, and research has actually shown that nostalgic experiences can increase feelings of social connectedness as well, and meaning of life, even optimism about the future, which is so amazing. So just know that returning to old music, returning to old TV shows, whatever it might be, it's not regression, it can be stabilization. When systems feel unstable, we anchor to all of those things. And I think that oftentimes music is the most efficient trigger for all of those anchors that we need to be feeling at that moment. Now we arrive at a, I guess, slightly more controversial concept. I don't think so. I think we're all guilty of it. But this is escape. When the world feels heavy, many people use music to disappear into another emotional space, to kind of disassociate slightly and enter a narrative that isn't tied to whatever's going on in that moment. The word escapism often carries negative connotations, as if stepping away from reality is inherently unhealthy, but psychologically, not all forms of escape are avoidance. There's actually something called adaptive dissociation, which is a temporary psychological distance that actually allows our nervous system to recover. So, engaging with fiction, storytelling, or immersive music can all provide this cognitive and emotional respite. It creates space to heal. Music also allows for narrative reframing. So, a song can help you reinterpret anger as empowerment, sadness as beauty, and loss as growth. And it offers emotional containment, a feeling that intense emotion does have boundaries and resolution as well. But there's also music as a catharsis. Research suggests that listening to music that matches your emotional state, even if it's sad or angry music at that time, it can really help you process and regulate those emotions rather than amplifying them. Safe anger release through music can actually reduce internal tension because the emotion is expressed symbolically rather than behaviorally. So, we might ask here, is escapism always avoidance, or can it actually be restoration? Now, if escape means numbing and suppressing, perhaps it does become avoidance. But if escape means intentional emotional processing, temporary distance, or this kind of imaginative renewal, it can actually be restorative. In unstable times, the ability to step into a song and feel something fully, without consequence, without debate, without amplification, can be profoundly regulating. Music becomes a space where the emotion is allowed. It's also more structured and complete, and that might be one of its most powerful roles during times of collective stress. Not to fix the world, but to stabilize the inner world long enough for us to function within it. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. Now, here's where I want to zoom out slightly. A society can be extremely dysregulated, but individuals can still regulate themselves. Those two things can coexist. I think we often talk about the state of the world as if it's a singular emotional entity. It's tense, it's divided, anxious, and polarized. And in many ways, it is. We've got this political rhetoric that's escalating, economic uncertainty that's lingering, and collective stress rises as a whole. And sociologists and psychologists sometimes describe this as a form of collective arousal, when large groups of people are emotionally activated at the same time. You can feel it in the tone of conversations, in the speed of online interactions, and just in the way that disagreement escalates quickly, even amongst friends. But here's the nuance. Even if society is dysregulated, us as individuals are not powerless. Regulation still happens at the level of the nervous system, and music operates actually at both of these levels simultaneously. At the individual level, we can self-soothe. We can deliberately choose music that lowers arousal, stabilizes mood, or helps us process emotion. That's micro-regulation. But music doesn't just stop at the individual. It's always, as we know, have been a tool of collective synchronization. And there's actually fascinating research on synchrony and social bonding. Studies show that when people move in rhythm together through dancing, clapping, chanting, singing, whatever it might be, levels of social bonding increase. Oxytocin, which is often associated with trust and connection, can rise during these synchronized musical activities. And experiments have found that individuals who engage in coordinated rhythmic tasks are more likely to actually cooperate afterwards compared to those who act independently. So rhythm literally aligns us. Heart rates can synchronize during shared musical experiences. Breathing patterns can. Even head movements can become coordinated without conscious awareness. When you attend a concert, sing in a choir, or even stream the same album as thousands of other listeners on release night, you're participating in a shared rhythm, shared anticipation and emotion. And synchronized emotion actually reduces perceived isolation. In moments of tension, isolation can intensify stress. Humans are wired for co-regulation. We regulate each other's nervous systems through facial expressions, tone of voice, proximity, and touch. Music extends that mechanism across space. You can feel emotionally aligned with someone you've never met simply because you're moved by the same song. And this is where music becomes a form of collective identity. Historically, songs have reinforced shared values, whether it's in protest movements, cultural celebrations, religious rituals, or national events. But beyond ideology, there's something more fundamental happening psychologically. Shared music creates shared meaning. It's signaling that we feel this together, we're going through this together right now. And social identity theory suggests that part of our sense of self is derived from group membership. So when we experience music as part of a group, whether that group is defined by culture, generation, community, or even fandom, it strengthens a sense of belonging, and belonging is regulating. When society feels tense, music can operate as this kind of counterbalance, not by erasing disagreement, not by dissolving complexity at all, but by creating these moments of alignment. We build these micro communities of emotion, a shared playlist between friends, a concert, a group chat where everyone adds the songs that are getting them through. These are small acts, but psychologically super meaningful because music can turn these moments of isolation into moments of collective experiences. Now, I'm seeing so many beautiful videos at the moment from different cultures, sharing music, sharing songs in their language as a form of unity, protest, celebration, even. And even as someone outside of their culture, it's so touching to see, such a beautiful form of expression, but also just seeing how it moves everyone and brings them together is such an amazing thing. But also, what I really find interesting is music can bring together people that stand on opposing sides. They may think they have nothing in common, but maybe they have the same favorite artist. And that's something which I think is a kind of unspoken truth in these kind of uncertain times is, music and art are one of those things that can be enjoyed by anyone and everyone. And maybe you connect with someone that you never thought you would based on the music that you listen to and connect with. And that's super powerful. But that's the thing. Music is so powerful, and anything powerful can be used in more than one direction. So, before we move too far into the comforting narrative of music as unity and regulation, it's important to make space for the complexity here. Now, I've spoken before in my episode on the sound of propaganda about how music can be used as a tool of influence, how governments, regimes, and movements harness sound to shape identity, loyalty, and belief. And that conversation doesn't disappear simply because we're now talking about regulation and unity. Because at the end of the day, music amplifies emotion, and amplification is neutral. It depends on what's being amplified. So, some of the examples I touched on in that episode to kind of show that historically regimes have understood this deeply. One, during Nazi Germany, for example, the music of Richard Wagner was appropriated and elevated as a symbol of ideological purity and national identity. But at the same time, jazz, which is associated with Black culture and modernism, has been labeled as degenerate and suppressed, which is, a crazy thing to look back on now. And music was never just art, it was political architecture, and honestly, still is in a lot of ways. It reinforced belonging for some while excluding and silencing others historically. And it's an important conversation. So if you're interested in digging more into that, I think it's more relevant now than ever. So please do check out that episode if you're interested. But this pattern does repeat across history. Art has always been used to foster nationalism, consolidate group identity, and emotionally charge political movements. Songs can make crowds feel unified, but that unity can be inclusive or exclusionary. Cohesion can also become conformity, and I think this kind of shared music in this sense can become mass mobilization as well. Now, from a psychological perspective, the same mechanisms that we've discussed previously can be used to regulate or to radicalize. Now, of course, this is not an argument against music in any way. It's an argument for awareness, definitely, because music is so emotionally potent, and we all know that. It interacts with identity, belonging, and arousal. And those forces can stabilize or destabilize depending on the context. And acknowledging this shadow side prevents us, I think, from being naive. It reminds us that when we talk about music uniting people, we must ask ourselves, uniting around what and for who? The same song that soothes one nervous system can actually activate another. So the goal here is not to romanticize music as a universal solution, because, of course, the world's problems are so much deeper than that. But the goal is to understand its mechanisms so that we can use them consciously. And that duality that music holds, I think, is precisely why it deserves this thoughtful attention rather than this kind of blind celebration of something that, of course, we all enjoy and love so deeply. Now, circling back to music's power to regulate, this power doesn't stop at everyday stress or news fatigue. It extends into contexts of trauma, displacement, and political instability, where both external pressures and internal tension are intense and often inescapable. Across cultures and history, music has been a vital tool for post-conflict healing. In communities recovering from violence, communal singing and music making has been shown to reduce anxiety, support emotional expression, and rebuild social networks. Here, music doesn't just soothe the individuals, it literally helps to restore relational safety, providing this space where grief, hope, and resilience can all coexist with each other. And for people living in diaspora or displaced by conflict, music often becomes an anchor to home and identity. Songs from childhood, traditional music, or shared community playlists help stabilize the self in environments that can feel uncertain or unsafe, or maybe their homeland is uncertain or unsafe at the moment. Researchers found that engagement with music in displaced populations can lower symptoms of depression and anxiety, strengthen social bonds, and foster this sense of resilience. Music carries both personal and collective meaning, as we know, offering this calm when the nervous system is on high alert, but also providing this sense of solidarity when social support is limited, and just this space for shared grief that both validates and contains loss that they might be feeling. It's linked to all of these aspects that I've already touched on. The narrative processing, trauma fractures the story of self, but familiar music can help restore this sense of continuity as well, providing this self-stabilization and reclaiming their identity in those unstable circumstances. It also helps them to release feelings that might have been repressed, whether it's sadness, anger, or fear, and allowing those emotions to be processed safely rather than suppressed. Now, when collective stress is overwhelming, music offers individuals agency over their internal landscape. Like I've said, it cannot change the external world, nor erase displacement, war, or societal instability. But it does allow people to stabilize their nervous systems, maintain continuity of identity, co-regulate with others, and process intense emotions. So whether it's through shared singing, curated playlists, or rhythmic engagement, music provides these moments of calm and alignment, becoming this tool for emotional survival and reclaiming stability and connection in the midst of chaos. Now, if all of this sounds a little bit abstract, I want to bring it home and finish off the episode with something that you can actually do, because understanding how music regulates, synchronizes, and heals is one thing, but acting on it is another. And that's why I want to encourage you to design your own emotional soundscape, a set of listening practices that gives you agency over your internal world, especially when the external one feels extremely chaotic. So think of it as creating a personal ecosystem of songs that support different emotional needs throughout your day. The first layer is what I'd call regulate. These are songs that calm, ground, and stabilize you when your nervous system is on high alert. So think slow tempos, predictable rhythms, familiar melodies, just the music that reminds you of safety, routine, and of home, wherever that might be. When you feel scattered, a playlist like this is your anchor, really helping you breathe, slow your heart rate, and create these micro moments of calm. Now, the second layer here is release. Now, this is a music that lets you feel and process intensity, whether that be anger, frustration, tension, or grief or sadness. Songs that build, swell, or crash in ways that match your internal energy. It's almost like a safe emotional storm to kind of put yourself through. And listening here isn't about wallowing. It's about giving yourself permission to express, discharge, and really just integrate what you feel into such a powerful outlet for releasing those emotions. And the third layer here is reconnect. These are the tracks that remind you of humanity, that reconnect you to love, friendship, community, or shared experience. They're the songs that make you feel less alone, that transport you to these moments of togetherness, whether they're real, based on memories that you might have, or imagined. This layer really helps to bridge personal regulation with the kind of social alignment. It's where music reminds us that we're part of something larger and there is still good in the world. Now, some of you might want to add a fourth layer here, which would be reclaim. Now, these are the songs that give you power, agency, and momentum. These are the tracks that make you feel capable, assertive, just ready to act. Music as motivation, as affirmation of your ability to influence your own experience, even when the world feels out of control. Now, designing your emotional landscape is not complicated at all. It doesn't require fancy equipment or hours of curation. It's all about paying attention to what your body and mind need, intentionally selecting music that meets that need, and giving yourself permission to move between layers as your mood, context, or stress levels shift. In these moments of uncertainty, creating this kind of emotional infrastructure can be as grounding as any other coping practice. And unlike most other tools, I want to say that it can be joyful, connective, and just profoundly human. And really also make you feel like you're not going out of your way to start something new as well. I think it can be super overwhelming to feel like, okay, I need to start doing breath work or mindfulness or yoga or whatever it might be to calm yourself, but actually taking something that you most likely already do every day, which is listening to music, but shifting it in a way that's a bit more intentional and adapting to the current space that you're in and just meeting you where you are at that moment. But that is it for today's episode. I know that things feel heavy right now. I don't have much to say apart from stay safe. I'm sending all of you so much love and support. Whatever you might need at this moment in time, be kind to yourself, step away, make sure you're prioritizing your emotional, physical, and mental health at the moment. That's the most important thing that I feel like can slip away when things feel so chaotic and just out of control. But just remember that you are in charge of your own internal world, and I hope that you can find some peaceful moments in your day amidst all the chaos right now. So wherever you are in the world, sending love and support. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who loves music just as much as you do or might need it during this time. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, come and say hi over on Threads on Instagram. Always love to engage with you all, and especially during this time, I think nothing's more powerful than having such a great community. So do come and join us over there. But until next time, look after yourself and keep listening, keep reflecting. I'll see you on the Sound Mind.